Hi, let's start with Professor Wanoshin lab presentation. One way to solve the safety problem of lithium-ion batteries is to develop electrolytes in a solid state. However, the ion conduction of solid electrolytes is significantly lower than liquid electrolytes, so the efficiency of the battery is poor. Therefore, we conducted research on increasing the ionic conductivity of oxide-based solid electrolytes. Our research was conducted by first synthesizing ATP, which is an oxide-based solid electrolyte, and adding several different materials to obtain better ion conductivity than basic ATP. Pure ATP was produced by this experimental method. ATP produced by adding dopants were also conducted using the same experimental method. However, in the first process, dopant material was added. There were 4 dopants used: tantalum, chromium, niobium, and antimony. Each dopant was added at 1, 2, 4, and 8 weight%, and the characteristics according to dopant content were analyzed. Then the ionic conductivity was analyzed through EIS, and the structure of the solid electrolyte containing the dopant was also examined through XRD and SEM. Now, I will explain the result of the experiment. The data is XRD of basic ATP. The size of the secondary phase peak is so small, and the peak corresponding to ATP is large and clear, showing that high purity ATP was obtained. And the ionic conductivity of ATP was 6 times 10 to the negative 5 Siemens per centimeter, and the relative density was about 89%. In the structure of ATP pellet, you can see that most of the particles have a cubic shape and that the particles are attached to each other. Through other papers referenced, it can be seen that the cubic particles in ATP observed in this experiment serve as channels for lithium ions, and it can be thought that more densely the pellets are attached without pores, the higher the relative density and ionic conductivity are. Looking at the XRD of ATP with tantalum added, it can be seen that high purity solid electrolytes were synthesized at all weight% except 8 weight%. Looking at the EIS graph, you can see that the resistance decreased significantly compared to the base phases as tantalum is doped, and that doping with 4 weight% results in the highest ionic conductivity. In addition, the relative density of all pellets produced with tantalum entered the 90% range, showing that the relative density was also significantly improved compared to basic ATP. However, from 8 weight%, ion conduction tended to decrease again. Looking at the sum, you can see that the particles have a more definite cubic shape than the basic parent phase, but from 4 weight%, the particles in the pellet gradually lose their cubic shape and very small size. Unspecific fit-shaped particles begin to observe. This can be assumed to be due to the excessive addition of the tantalum, resulting in impurities. Secondary, in ATP added chromium, you can see that a large amount of impurity peaks are observed in both of the XRD of the power after calcination and the XRD of the pellet after sintering. This means that high purity synthesis has not been achieved. It can be seen that the ionic conductivity and relative density are also much lower compared to the basic ATP. Looking at them, chromium-added ATP did not properly produce cubic-shaped particles, and impurities were created resulting in a poor ionic conduction or no measurement at all. Third, these are characteristics when niobium is added. The XRD of 1-2 weight% pellet is cleaner than that of the powder, showing that high purity synthesis was achieved after sintering process. It can be seen that the relative density of the pellet with 1-4 weight% of niobium is improved to over 90%, and the resistance is greatly reduced compared to pure ATP. However, from 8 to 8%, it can be seen that the ionic conductivity dropped again with a resistance similar to the basic LATP. Compared to the pellet with tantalum added, in the pellet with niobium added, particles grew further, particle contact was improved, and a much denser microstructure was formed. It can be expected that this structure produces a high relative density of pellets. Lastly, these are all characteristics of LATP with antimony added. After sintering process, it can be assumed that the synthesis was done properly because the impurity peaks seen in the powder were not visible in all pellets, and a much clearer after they appeared. All pellets added with antimony had much reduced resistivity compared to the basic LATP. However, an ideal solid electrolyte should show one semicircle plot when measuring EIS, but two semicircle plots appeared in all pellets doped. Also, unlike a typical solid electrolyte plot, an EIS plot was produced in which the second semicolor was much smaller. The relative density of all pellets is over 92%, which shows that the relative density is significantly improved compared to the basic parent material. However, given that it showed a typical solid electrolyte EIS plot, it was judged that antimony needed more detailed analysis and could not be said to be a better defined material than tantalum and niobium. In the pellet-doped antimony, as amount of antimony increased, more particles were observed to be attached to each other. The larger the amount added, the more dense the structure was, to the point where the boundaries were indistinguishable, as if the surface of pellet was coated. It seemed to be that this structure makes the second semicircle appear much smaller in the EIS plot. Therefore, it was determined that LATP with the addition of chromium and antimony could not obtain data showing that its performance was better than that of the basic LATP. As a result, among the four dopants, the sintered body with niobium and tantalum added to LATP showed the best ionic conductivity and relative density. And among them, the sintered body doped with 48% of tantalum showed the highest ionic conductivity. Also, both dopants are observed to have a structure with less particle densification than the basic LATP. They are seen to have a more definite cubic shape, and through this, it was necessary to have particles with a clear cubic shape in order to serve as a passage for lithium ions. However, because the particle size is smaller than the base pace and the contact between particles is poor compared to the base pace, it was thought that sufficient particle growth and appropriate sintering were not achieved. LATP with tantalum and niobium added would be improved if the temperature of the heat treatment process was raised further. Thank you for listening my presentation.